Hello everyone, welcome back to the Anatomy Lab. Today we're going to be taking a look at the anatomy of the eye, which will include the major eye structures as well as the layers of the eye as well. So to get started, let's go ahead and start by talking about the eye itself, which, if you look at the eye, is pretty recognizable, but the eye, just in case you weren't aware of, is actually kind of like a big balloon. So you kind of have like you have three layers of the eye, which is going to be just this thin part around the outside, but in the center it's going to be filled with fluids that are going to be able to give your eye that rounded, circular, and spherical shape. So to get started, let's take a look at the layers of the eye, which, if you look closely, starts on the outside, which is where you would find the white part of the eye, known as the sclera. So this part, the white part, is the sclera, but just to be clear, the whole outside of the eye can't be white because you need to have an area where light can enter the eye, which is transparent, which, if you look at the front of the eye, this right here is what's known as the cornea. So you have most of the eye being white, but right in the front of the eye, this is what's known as the cornea. So the outside of the eye is the sclera and the cornea, known as the fibrous tunic. But in the middle, you can see that you have this reddish tissue. This reddish tissue is the vascular tunic, which is going to be throughout, once again, most of the eye, but has some specialized structures in the front. So this red part throughout most of the eye, this thin layer right under the sclera, this is what's known as the choroid. And the choroid is going to be highly vascular, meaning that there's a lot of blood vessels, but also highly pigmented to help with reducing reflections within the eye. But looking at the front of the eye again, this is where it gets a little bit more intricate. So if you look at the choroid, you're going to see that it actually thickens to this region right here. This thickened region is actually going to be forming this ring that's going to be circular and surrounding this clear structure, which, once again, allows light to pass through it, but also, in this case, focuses light in the eye. So if you look at that thickened region, this ring is going to be called the ciliary body, and then this clear part is going to be called the lens. So ciliary body, the lens, and although not shown, between the lens and the ciliary body, there's supposed to be these little tiny ligaments coming off of it. That would be called the suspensory ligaments. But there's one more very well-known part of the eye, which you'll see, which is a part of the vascular tunic, which is this part. And if I kind of show you from the front, you might see that this right here is the colored ring in the front of the eye. This colored ring in the front of the eye, this circular structure surrounding this hole in the middle, this is what's known as the iris. So that colored ring can be, different colors like green, blue, hazel, brown, but that ring is the iris. But just to be clear, that hole in the middle is the pupil. So that hole in the middle, that black dot, literally, it's not actually a black dot, it's a hole that's going to look black because it's so dark in the inside of the eye because of the choroid. So our last layer, though, is going to be our internal layer, the deepest layer, which is the neural layer, the neural tunic, which is mostly composed of this broad orange layer, which is called the retina. So this right here is the retina, and if you look at the retina, it actually does have an edge where it kind of starts and ends. This is called the ora serrata. So ora serrata, retina. But if you look at the back of the retina, what you'll notice is that there's a couple of things that you want to look for. So the retina, first of all, is where you'd find all the photoreceptors, where you are going to be able to detect light by having them stimulated by light. But there's a couple of important parts to look for too. And the first one is kind of small, but if you look really closely, you'll see that little tiny divot. That's going to be the fovea centralis. So the fovea centralis is that little divot, and this is special because, the cornea and the lens together are going to be focusing light to a fine point to hit right here at the fovea centralis. So what's allowing you to see clearly instead of blurry is that you have the light focused right here on the fovea centralis, which has most of your cones, which give you color and clear acute vision. But something else that you'll see here is that you have this nerve attached to the eye. This is called the optic nerve, or in like specific terms, optic cranial nerve 2. But if you look closely, do you see where all of this red and blue comes out from the eye? Do you see how you have all of these fibers coming out of the eye as well? This is where you have the blood vessels and the neurons, or rather the axons, all leaving the eye at the optic nerve. And that makes this special place right here called the optic disc. Now, with that said, though, those are the layers of the eye, but you would also have these spaces of the eye, like in the front, you have this area between the cornea and the lens, which is filled with aqueous humor, but then you also have this area in the back, which represented by this big globe. This is going to be the vitreous chamber, otherwise known as the posterior cavity, but this is going to be the vitreous humor inside of it. And when you look at the dissection, you should see this jelly-like substance, which was the vitreous humor in the posterior portion of the eye. But this is basically what's filling up the eye to make the kind of like balloon inflate so that you get this round spherical shape. Now, with that said, though, we can see some specific parts of the eye from the outside too, which is, not typical, but if you look at these, you can see the sclera on the outside, but then you can also see the highly vascular choroid with all those blood vessels. And then the deepest part of the eye, that orange part on the inside, this is where you have the photoreceptors, so this is called the retina. Now there is one last model and one more way that we want to look at this, which is in the microscopic view, which this will show you a lot more detail. But if you look closely, this is still 3 different layers of the eye. So to start off with, do you see the outside part right here, the white part, the part that's going to be mostly just, just a layer of protective cells? That's going to be this part right here. This is going to be what's known as the sclera. And if you look in the middle, do you see this layer with all of the blood vessels, all of the big blue and red, and then also the purple that's kind of scattered in between? This is what's known as the choroid. So sclera, protective outside, choroid, highly vascular, and then the part that's going to have all of the neurons and photoreceptors is from here to here. This right here is the retina. And if you look at the retina, what you'll see is that there's a little bit more specificity that you can see in the microscopic view. So to start off with, these right here are your photoreceptors. These are your rods and cones. So if you look closely, you have 2 different types of cells here. The ones with the kind of long parts, or kind of more cylindrical parts. These are going to be called the rods. And then, making it a little bit easier, do you see these colored ones that are a little bit more tipped and fat? But these are going to be the cones, the colored ones that give you your color vision. So interestingly, your rods and cones are actually in the back of your retina, which is going to be where you find the choroid. But then also, if you look closely here, this right here in the middle is going to be where you find the bipolar cells. But lastly, these layers on the deepest part of the eye, this is the ones with those long axons in the very deepest regions of the retina. This is the ganglion cells. So if you look closely though, this is still the same thing as what you see here, just in a little bit of a different view. But with that said, that should be just about it for today. So thank you for listening, good luck with your studying, and I'll see you all next time.